So it looks like it's 1:05, so we're going to get started with our midweek check-in. Thank you everybody for attending. Thank you so much for, I hope you enjoyed that joke. Thank you. You might have already discovered the chat feature down at the bottom of your screen. Those that you can chat with each other and you can ask us questions, but if any questions that you do have during this webinar, please send them over to the Q&A section and we will go ahead and gather them and answer them at the very end. So I think we're ready to get started. Like I said, my name is Misael Robledo. I'm here with Paige today. We are working with our team of education here. And we have Omar, who is on slide duty today. Thank you, Omar, for working with us. We're ready to move on to the next slide. We're taking a look at the agenda of what you can expect for these next 55 minutes or so. A quick general introduction of ourselves, of the CAC, a review of the design process, which is the tool that you're all working with this week, some of the questions that we've received over email, and we're sharing with you all some of the best photos that you've sent us, some of our favorites. And then we're also sharing what we've been working on this week. We are working through the design process alongside all of you. And then what you can expect for the rest of the week. Anything to add, Paige, before we move on?
No, I think we're ready to go.
Perfect. All right, so next slide, please. Like I said, my name is Misael Robledo. I am the education coordinator at the Chicago Architecture Center. I work with Paige. We at the education department, we get to work with about 30,000 young people every single year with workshops and walking tours and family programs. And this is our very first virtual experience for families. So we're very excited to be working through the design process with you all. This webinar is going to be recorded for future reference. The resources that you received this week will be on our website on the education page in the future after this program is over. Anything else, Paige?
Yeah, so the very first virtual experience. So we're really getting into the design process. We're all, learning so much from all of this. And so we're really, really excited to, move out from this and continue bettering a lot of our programs.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I think we're ready for the next slide. So the Chicago Architecture Center, our mission is to help people discover why design matters. And we talk a lot about design as this invisible thing. When it's done really, really well, we hardly notice it. We don't really notice when our phones are working well, when the scissors that we're working with are working well. It's only when design is done poorly that we begin to notice it, which is why we have the design process, which is in the next slide, this 6-step process, this tool that we use to make decisions all about our designs. And you, so far, have done the first 3. So we have step 1 to find the problem. What is the problem from this week, Paige? Do you know what this week's problem?
Yeah, this week's problem is that we're trying to figure out, how to add a residential building to our neighborhoods.
Inspired by our own home, right? In step 2, we're collecting information. We're doing a visual survey. We're looking outside of our homes, always keeping a safe distance from people right now. Just writing down our observations, seeing what we notice. Step 3, brainstorm and analyze ideas, our sketching stage. We've made a lot of sketches ourselves. We hope you've done a lot of sketches. We've seen some of them ourselves too. But today and tomorrow, we are working on step 4 of the design process. What is step 4 of the design process, Paige?
Step 4 of the design process is to develop solutions and build a model. Very exciting.
Very exciting. We're bringing our ideas to life, in other words, right? Mm-hmm. Take a look at the next slide. So in the next FAQ portion, we are going to answer some questions that clarify instructions that are in the resources that you receive every day. We're going to answer some questions about architecture, questions just for fun that we've received, and then we'll make some time to answer questions that are being submitted here in the chat. So let's get started with the first part, FAQs. Anything to add, Paige, before we move on to the first few questions?
So we've got a couple of questions that are sitting in our chat right now. For folks that are concerned about privacy as far as recording, we cannot see anyone's face or hear them through the webinar format. So your privacy is totally protected in this. We can see, however, things that you submit to the chat or to the Q&A functions. I just want to put that one out there before we moved on.
Thank you, Paige. Yes. Cool. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the first few FAQs, first few questions that we've got.
Sure thing.
All right. So here are some questions that we got from day one. Where do I find the information for daily activities? These are sent to you via email every day at 5 o'clock. Central Standard Time, I should add. We are in the Chicago Architecture Center. So 5 o'clock Central Standard Time, that is when you should be receiving your materials or information about daily activities in your inbox. Let's see, next question. Do we have to use the materials that are recommended? Is there a list of alternate materials? Do we have to use the same materials page? I think you can answer this one, right?
Yeah, I totally can.
Materials that we recommend.
So, we do have a list of recommended materials, just that we've learned throughout our programming in the past that works really well, or that you can find kind of around the home really easily. So you can totally use those things. And there are a couple of alternates that are provided in some of those lists. But, we're all for creativity and we're all for imagination. So please, please use whatever you can find, whatever you think would work in these builds, right? And so I've been experimenting myself a little bit, trying to figure out things around my home that would work here. And I was actually inspired by my breakfast this morning, and I tried to use, I don't know if you all can see this. Well, I just figured out that part of that build didn't work. But I have cherries right here that I've stuck together using toothpicks, if you all can see that. So in some of our recommended skeleton structures, we recommended that you use gumdrops or marshmallows. And so all those things have some really particular properties that are really similar, right? So they're kind of squishy, they're sticky, it holds things together really well. So you can use that kind of thinking to kind of move you throughout a lot of your projects, right? So for cherries, for example, they're permeable, so you can stick things in them, but they still retain their structure, right? So I definitely recommend trying to think outside the box and try and use a lot of those different materials. And it makes it a little bit more exciting when you get to experiment and try. And that's a part of this design process, right? Is to keep trying new things.
Keep trying new things, sketching different things, right? If you think a material that you have would work better, feel free to use it. Let's see, what does it mean when you ask us to do a visual survey? When we ask you to do a visual survey, Paige and I did this too. We went out into our neighborhoods, always, keeping a safe distance from everybody, making sure that we're keeping ourselves and everybody else safe. Or you can also just look outside the window and write down everything you notice. I noticed a couple trees. I see a couple of stop signs. I see there's a train station nearby. Those were questions that I was asking during my visual survey, and I wrote them all down in my notebook. So when you're making a plan, when you're making a design, you're collecting information. That's all you're doing, right? You are gathering information, making observations, recording them, writing them down. Anything to add before we move on to the next part of our FAQ?
I think you summarized that really well. Let's move on.
All right, let's take a look at the next slide. All right, so day 2, we had a couple questions. I don't understand what you mean when you talk about modern buildings emphasizing volume over mass. So I think this question is referring to building styles. When we talk about buildings like Beaux-Arts buildings, for instance, that are inspired by classical Greco-Roman architecture. They look heavy, they feel heavy, they look like they've been there for a really long time. Modern buildings kind of reject that heaviness that Beaux-Arts buildings really like. They're more about making the space as big as possible, the walls as thin as possible, because we're using those skeleton frames that help us build really, really tall without having really, really thick walls. What about the second question from day 2?
Yeah, second question says, elevation views. What do you mean when you say draw the pepper from the side? So as we know from going from our directions from day 2, elevation views are that flat view of a design, of a building, of your pepper. And so when I say flat view, I'm talking about when we look at our pepper from the front. So if you set it on the table right in front of you, so I'm going to use one of my cherries, for example, that I have sitting with me. So the way that you're looking at this cherry in my hand is elevation view. You're looking at it from that flat side and only one side of the cherry, right? And so when you put that pepper or whatever fruit, vegetable that you decided to draw in your sketches on a flat surface, you're only drawing it from that one particular angle, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about elevation views.
Right.
And we did have a question that just popped up in the Q&A. What is an example of a perspective view? Misael, do you want to take that one?
I do have an example. So we can see different perspectives. This is an example of a sketch that I made, one of my initial sketches of this is an elevation view, right? We are only seeing the front of the building, just one side. That's just one perspective. You can make something, you can make plan views, which show a bird's eye view, what you would see looking down from the top of the building. And you can see section views, which are elevations with just one wall cut off. I hope that answers your question. Those are the 3 perspectives that we're working with. Let's see, anything we should add before we move on to the next slide?
That seems good.
Yeah, I think we're ready for the next slide. Let's see.
Let us know in the chat if we're answering your questions to the fullest that you need them to. We love hearing feedback.
Right. Day 3 says, can we use Legos to build massing models? This is a great question because yes, you can make a massing model using Legos. Legos actually don't, they're really great for that because you can just stack on top and you get a feel for the overall shape and the volume of your build. So I think that'd be a great idea. We do recommend that for the rest of the week for your actual build, you do use different materials just so that you can add ornamentation and you can add different context to your build. We'll take a look at some of that later in this webinar. Yeah, the next question is, will we be asked to present our models? There won't be a formal presentation with this design club. This is our first like virtual camp or virtual program, I should say. But for future camps, like summer camps that do have a showcase, they do have a final presentation day. That'll be part of those programs in the future. So keep an eye out for those.
Mm-hmm. All right. I see in the chat someone said, yes, Legos.
Lego fans on this webinar. Yeah.
So also, we highly encourage you all to, if you want to have a more public audience for some of the things that you're building, you can also use our hashtag Chai Architecture, or if you are on social media, you can at us at Chai Architecture and show us your builds, and we'd be really excited to receive them that way too.
Yeah, feel free to tag us at Chai Architecture. That will be in the last slide as well if you didn't catch that. I think we're ready for the next slide. Let's take a look. A couple questions just for fun. Are there load-bearing buildings in the Chicago Loop? Yes, we have a couple of load-bearing buildings in the Chicago Loop. We have the Art Institute, for instance. We have the Chicago Cultural Center, part of the Monadnock building on Jackson. Those are examples of load-bearing buildings. What are the tallest buildings in Chicago? Do you know them, Paige?
Oh geez, what are the tallest buildings in Chicago? Is there a famous one that was the tallest for like 30 years? What could
almost 20 years, yeah. The Sears Tower, now known as the Willis Tower.
Right, yep. So Sears Willis, Will Sears, the Sirius Tower, also how I've heard it before, is the tallest building in Chicago, and was the tallest in the world for a really long time. Shelley McDowell, thank you so much. We got Sears Tower. We've got John Hancock, is also another one of those buildings that are super, super tall in Chicago. I think the John Hancock building was the 5th tallest. Is that correct, Misael?
I think it might be right now. The Trump International Hotel and Tower.
It's number 2.
Number 2. Number 3 right now is Vista Tower, Jeannie Gang, right? The tallest building in the world, designed by a woman-led architecture firm, I think. Yeah, if you have any more fun, just for fun, architecture FAQs, we'll do our best to answer them. Let's take a look at the next slide. So here, then this part is we are just showcasing what some of you all are doing, Here we have a participant from day 1. I like that they're using a different material than what we asked. We said marshmallows and toothpicks, and you're using Tinker Toys. It's great. You're using blocks. I like that you're thinking outside the box here. Let's take a look at the next slide.
Yeah, in this particular photo, our friends and participants here are experimenting with the skeleton builds. So you can see them using their marshmallows and their toothpicks and really trying to figure out all those different shapes that we can use that we use when making some of these 3D figures. So in this photo, I see some triangles, got some cubes, got some like the cubes and the triangles stuck together. Like, we've got some really cool builds that are happening here.
Yeah. Let's take a look at the next slide. All right, so this is day 2. We are getting to those elevation, those plan views, those section views. And here's another example of using materials that are around the house that are not necessarily what we recommended. We recommended that you use a bell pepper. And here we have an apple. We have a couple of great drawings, very detailed drawings of an apple, which is super cool. What else do we have in day 2? Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, here it looks like in our sketches, a very detailed sketch of an orange. And you can kind of see in the section view in that left bottom corner, you can see like the little folds where the pieces of your orange would be, right? And it looks like on the very bottom sketch, you know, to me this looks like an apple, but I think art is best left up to interpretation. So, you know, the artist may have had a specific idea, but we are the public. We like to understand it in different ways. But both of these sketches are really awesome ways for us to understand all those different views of, you know, our designs or things that are designed in the world, right? And then right next to it, we've got this really cool image of the contrast that happens in some of our activities. So we see kind of our load-bearing activity where we've got all these really solid blocks all put together into a really awesome shape. We've got like a tower going on. It's got a half circle on it. It has triangles and squares, and putting all those things together was a really cool idea. And then we also have a bunch of different 3D shapes using marshmallows and toothpicks, it looks like. So yeah. More triangles, got a prism down there. And
more pyramids too.
Yeah, pyramids.
Yeah. Today is all about 3D shapes, so this is a great segue. Thank you so much to everybody who shared with us your progress. We'd love to see more of it. But I think we're ready for the next slide. This is where we show you what we've been working on this week, some of the things that we've done. If you have any questions that we haven't answered yet, please feel free to submit them in the chat. We'll try to take some time to answer them during this last part of our webinar. All right, so let's take a look at the next slide. So Paige, would you like to get started?
Yeah, so we've also been doing these builds right alongside you all. So we're all about at the same point as everyone else is, right? So on our first day, we had to do our visual survey. And so all that meant was that we needed to observe our surroundings. We needed to understand what was going on in order to first begin making our builds, right? That's the brainstorm part of the design process. So I went ahead and named my build. I encourage you all to name them because that adds a little bit more, we've got personality in our designs, and, they come from us. So it'd be really cool to name those designs too. Just like how Willis Tower or the Sears Tower have names, our designs can have names. So for mine, I live close to Lincoln Park. And so it was really important for me to make sure that my building that I was designing was around the same, had the same feel as a lot of the other buildings that are around that area. We've got a beautiful park there. The zoo is over there. If anyone here has never been to Chicago, the Lincoln Park Zoo is free and very fun. So definitely recommend visiting that place. And so, going around this area, I really wanted to make sure that my building fit that. So I looked around and I said to myself, there are a lot of buildings here that are around 3 stories. Some of them are even higher. Some of them are even lower. So I could pretty much build a building that could be anywhere in between that. So I could put like a 5 to 10 story building. I could put a 2-story building, and it would still fit in that neighborhood, right? I also really wanted to emphasize green space in my build. And so what I mean by green space is that I really wanted there to be open areas where people could hang out, where there were plants and nature, because there is a lot of plants and nature over by the zoo, right? And it'd be really cool if one day maybe like one of the lemurs escaped from the zoo and I got to like hang out with it at my design. That'd be pretty awesome. I also really want it to be welcoming. So for your builds, you can also think of what kind of feelings you want people to have when they come into your building. So since they're residential buildings where people live, having a building that welcomes everyone and that everyone feels at home in, I think was a really important part of my build. And I also named it the Lincoln Log because Lincoln Park, and I wanted it to be brown.
Nice. Thank you for sharing all of that. So I also did a visual survey. I already shared one sketch. I have several sketches of this. I named mine. The personality that I gave mine is the green thumb because I want residents to connect over green spaces, over gardening, and over just living a more environmentally conscious life, and connecting to nature. I live in the neighborhood Pilsen in Chicago. So there are a lot of 3 flats, 4 flats, workers' cottages, a couple buildings that are, max 5 stories high. So I made my building just a little bit taller so it could stand out from the rest of them. And I gave it a really bright green color because, like Paige said, we want to make sure we include a little personality in our building so that they stand out, so that everybody can see our builds and say, I know whose that is, right?
Yeah, totally, Misael.
Thank you.
That's a really cool idea.
Can we move on to the next slide? All right, so let's see. Again, all we did was understand the problem, which was designing and building a residential space inspired by your own space, collecting information so that visual survey, right, going outside. And we sort of talked about this already. Paige noticed that there were 30 to 40 people per building. I think my neighborhood is it's less densely populated. So I think about 25 people in my building at least, and in the buildings around mine. So that's what we focused on. That was our focus for day 1, understanding what we were designing. What are we doing in day 2, Paige? Can we see the next slide?
Yeah, let's look at that. All right, so in day 2, we've gone through the brainstorming process, but now it's time to put those on paper, right? So what I did here was I put a preliminary, sketch of what I thought my building should look like. I want to highlight again a comment from our chat that says Legos, Legos, Legos. Yes. So in this part, we're only using pencil and paper. So Legos come towards the middle of our process for sure. And so in this one, I'm showing you, so we're looking at the sketch on our left side of these 2 photos. So this is an elevation view, like we mentioned before. So the perspective, we had a question in the Q&A that asked, how is perspective view different from other views? So the perspectives that we talk about in this particular stage of brainstorming, all are very specific. So the perspective right here is elevation. The next perspective in the next photo is plan. So those are, perspective is kind of like the overall theme, but then the subsections or the kind of ideas within that are elevation, plan, section, view. Those are all part of perspective, right? So back to my elevation view. Right here, you can see a lot of different things about the sketch. So I decided, you know, we talked a lot about how many stories there could be. Maybe 3 is a good number, right? And you can tell that there are 3 stories because there are 3 rows of windows, right? And where does my door go? You know, how do people get in this building? Well, look right down there at the bottom. We have kind of this little archway and 2 doors right there in the middle. And there are a lot of other things that you can notice about this plan view, or about this elevation view as well. So there's a sidewalk in front of the building. There's, you know, a bike path right in front of that, and then the road. So you know that it's close to where people move, where traffic happens, right? And then we talked a lot about green space too. And in there we see trees too. So that's kind of how I wanted to show that there were trees. And then also I decided that I wanted to give my building some cool personality. I didn't want it to be just brown. So I added right there at the top some extra ornamentation. So I added some of that fun little lines, and I added some, other things.
Cornice, right? A cornice.
Yeah, a cornice. Yeah, thank you.
It's a vocabulary word for everyone. A cornice.
Yeah, look that up.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for sharing that. So we're on day 2. We were on day 2 yesterday. Today is day 3. We're talking all about 3-dimensional shapes, right? And you had 2 options. The warm-up today was can we move on to the next slide? To start building a model and to start thinking about the overall shape, the overall volume, how much space it's going to take. Is it going to be tall? How do you express that using the materials that we we'll go ahead and do that in a second. Thank you we'll spell out that vocabulary word. So we're talking about 3-dimensional shapes. In your resource pack today, you received a couple of nets, of 3-dimensional shape nets. I decided to draw mine myself, and I cut them out, right? You fold them up, you add glue to the sides. Did anybody have any trouble with this? If you did, feel free to throw it in the chat. We'll try to answer your question at the very end. So the option was, I see, what do you mean? So you cut, if you see that picture there, you cut out that net, right? I fold it along the black lines. Just fold along the black lines, add a little glue tape to the tabs, and then we'll go ahead and it'll assemble the actual build, if you can see that. It'll be a 3-dimensional shape. All right, so can we looks like we lost our PowerPoint, so we're gonna try to get that up again. In the meantime, we'll try to answer some of these questions. I did see that there was a question that said, is it okay to use architecture from one of my favorite books? Please feel free to look at inspiration from any books that you have. Feel free to check out our Buildings of Chicago page on architecture.org. We've got a lot of cool resources there for the ornamentation, all of that. So let's see, any questions that you wanted to answer, Paige? Let's see if we can get this PowerPoint pulled up. Let's see.
All right, so we're still getting a lot of questions about cornices. So we did throw a really fun vocab word at you all and didn't explain it. So we can go ahead and talk about that a little bit. So as you saw before, I can't show it to you right now, but as you saw before on the elevation view, I had a couple of decorations that were at the very top of my building. And so a lot of decoration and architecture, they have really, really specific names. And, you know, that helps people organize it by the different kinds of styles that exist in architecture. So we have different styles like Beaux-Arts, or we have mid-century modern or things like that, right? And so a cornice is a particular type of decoration that is usually located at the top and is kind of like a ledge. So it goes over the roof or the top of the building, like forward towards the street. And it usually has, you know, specific designs on it. Nice, we got our PowerPoint back in. And so it doesn't add too much to a building besides making it more beautiful. And that's really the purpose of those decorations, that ornamentation, is to make buildings really great to look at. You know, that's part of our builds. And then, okay, so we got to see an architect at someone's home, and you got to see a floor plan. That's really awesome. So one of our friends in the chat just said that they got to see a floor plan. And so you saw my floor plan that I did in a previous slide, and in that you could see, so in a floor plan you can see all the things that go in your building, right? So you can see where doors are, you can see where the bathroom is, you can see bedrooms and stuff like that. So that's what that gives us an idea of, right?
Right. So let's hold all questions for the last part, where we'll be answering them for the last part. Keep submitting them, we'll answer them as soon as we're done with this, which we almost are. Let's take a look at the next slide. Let's see. All right, so next steps. What are we doing in day 4 and day 5? So Paige already kind of talked about that cornice. She talked about ornamentation. We are thinking about materials that go on the outside of our builds. We are thinking about materials that go on the inside. You will learn a little bit more about both materials. You'll learn about things like steel, glass, things you might already know about, but maybe ceramic and terracotta, which is one of my favorite building materials to have on the outside. That is what I'm planning on. That is what my design would be clad in. Green terracotta, like my favorite building in Chicago, the Carbide and Carbon building down in the Loop. Day 5, what are we doing in day 5, Paige?
Yeah, and so in day 5, we're also thinking about not just what our buildings can do, but also the context around those buildings. And so what do I mean by context? So when I talk about context, those are all the things that you see outside of a building. So when we're looking at some of these pictures, you can see, you know, what does that look like? Oh, that looks like it could be a tree. So right there in the corner of my build, I took some green paper and I smashed it all up in my hands into the shape of a pine tree. It looks kind of like a pine tree to me, and used that to show green space on my build. And so, you know, it's a really important part of, you know, creating these models is also creating, you know, how people are going to interact with the building itself, but also the space that it's in, you know, and creating meaning around those buildings. I also decided that I could use some water features. So I cut out a piece of blue paper and I made a tiny pond in the front. That could be really fun for people coming in. They could see maybe a family of ducks that came to live on that pond, and that really adds to the build and enhances how people feel about it, right? I also decided tiny bench for people to hang out of it too. And so you can see I have a tiny plastic person that I put on my build who's just sitting on this bench. You know, it could be a bus stop eventually, but it also could just be a way for someone to just be around and make it a more welcoming space, because I said that was really important to me.
Right. So you're thinking about all of the spaces around your building, to include paths that lead to other buildings, to the street, a bench, maybe a bus stop, all of that context, right? So that's day 4 and 5. You'll continue working on step 4 tomorrow for day 4, and then step 5, day 5, you will work on step 5, which is present your ideas to others for feedback, and then also improve your design based on the feedback that you receive. So we are excited about all of the work that we receive from you all, from all the participants. We love it. We love that you are working hard on these projects. Feel free to share your work with us on social media, like we said, at Chai Architecture. And then you can use the hashtag Chai Architecture as well. We are going to start answering some questions that we've got in the Q&A. Please bear with us. They're scattered between the Q&A and the chat. I have one right here that is asking about book suggestions. we have a lot of favorite books. A lot of them I can think of them. I can think of Iggy Peck, Architect by Andrea Beatty, Last Stop on Market Street. That's another one. I have a couple in front of me, but let me, do you have any recommendations, Paige?
I really enjoyed all of the Pigeon books, A Pigeon's View of a City. Those are all really good books. I think there's multiple of them. Let's see. Rosie Revere, Engineer. That's a really exciting one.
Yeah.
And is, you know, architects don't just do building plans, but also, you know, have considerations for engineering. So that's also a really important one to put into your collection of books.
So I actually have Rosie Revere, Engineer, with me right here, along with Iggy Peck, Architect, and Ada Twist, Scientist. We have a lot of favorite children's books. Those 3 books are by Andrea Beatty. I think Francis D.K. Ching is the Last Stop on Market Street writer, or architectural. Oh, we're getting some ideas from Omar, who is CAC Design Club. We also have this 3 Little Pigs, an architectural tale that we love, and Roberto the Insect Architect.
Oh, love that one.
If you want a more complete list, we can definitely put something together and have it as a resource after the program. Any other questions that we haven't answered yet?
Oh yeah, and Shelley also added in there, Frank Lloyd Wright for Kids. So if anyone wants to read that book, definitely go ahead and do that too.
Yeah. That you have, please put them in the Q&A. We will do our best to address them. I'm looking through the chat now just to make sure that we didn't miss anything. Let's see.
And we're so excited about everyone's work. You know, we've seen some really awesome photos, and those are really inspiring to us. And we definitely appreciate that. And appreciate all the love and work that you all are putting in. It's really exciting to do all these things with you.
Yeah. I don't see any questions we missed, but I do see that we have a lot of architecture fans. We have a lot of people talking about John Hancock Building and the Willis Tower, and the Monadnock even, right? So that's exciting. It's exciting to have participants that are excited to work on architecture. That's all I have for right now. Should we wait a couple more minutes for the questions? I don't see any.
Yeah, and we can also try and prompt you all. So has anyone had any trouble with any of the directions or any of the builds so far? I see our friend has already given us a response. Thank you so much. Yeah, so some people haven't really run into any issues. If anyone does, we are always open for questions through email usually, and this. From 10 to 2 o'clock, and we'll answer your email straight away and make sure that we're helping you out there.
Right.
All right.
Looks like
summer camps. So our friend Omar also reminded us about summer camps. So that's something that's happening in June and July is when those are scheduled out for. Check them out on architecture.org. Summer camps are usually an activity that go for a whole week, just like this, but with a lot more interaction between us. So we'd be able to get together
one-on-one support.
With more one-on-one support. So we'd be able to do these really complicated and very cool builds together, and learn about some more detailed information regarding those. We have a question from Shelley. Would you like to go for that one, Sam?
Yeah, so it says the floor plan was a bit challenging to conceptualize for my son, but the Future Architect's Handbook really helped visually explain the concept. Okay, so that's good. So it is difficult to describe a plan view, right? We interact with our rooms, right? We walk through them. We don't really think about the spaces, what it looks like from the top. If it's helpful, something that I did for my floor plan was I looked at my room and I kind of measured, just eyeballing it, just like looking. My room is kind of a square. There's a door on the bottom left corner, and then I started from there. Plan views can be difficult. I did see somewhere somebody asked if you could measure your rooms and your floors and all of that. You are more than welcome to do that if you have the right tools. But it is also okay to make educated guesses based on what you see around you. So yes, floor plans are difficult. Some perspective drawings are difficult. We're excited that you're excited for this time learning about architecture. It's great for us too. Thank you so much for being a part of our design process as we figure out how we move forward with family programs. You all are a priority for us, so we really thank you for working with us through this time. If there aren't any further questions, I think we can stay on for about 5 more minutes, and we'll go ahead and end this webinar right at 1:50. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye.